So the final standalone presentation is, I'm going to introduce John to you now. But John, to give us an update on the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation and the DTIC Trade facilitation support that's available to manufacturers, I welcome John Rocha to the stage, the Chief Director of Trade Invest Africa at the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. Very welcome, sir.
Yes, I hope it will be easier. Don't like which one? This one?
Yes, the one with this one.
Ah, that one. Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. In my other life, I'm a preacher, so when you greet, you expect a greeting back. But thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you to the organizers for inviting us. And I can see my colleagues already did their part. And we are one of the key pillars, pillar number 3, pertaining to exports. I am part of the division called Trade Invest South Africa, Trade and Investment South Africa. This division is responsible for promoting South African exports across the world, but also within the division, there's a unit called Trade Invest Africa that is responsible for Africa. We also promote what we call South Africa's outward investment into all the corners of the world. I'm currently the Chief Director for Trade Invest Africa. And I was asked to speak about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. There are 2 units or divisions in the department working on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. We have a trade policy division that is engaged in the negotiations. So they are very, very busy, almost every day negotiating with other countries. And they're making some progress, which I'll share with you. My unit will be responsible for implementing the agreement once the negotiations are fully concluded. It's a very complex agreement. My presentation is quite long, but I'll not spend time looking at all of it, going through it. I'll pick a few slides that I'll touch on. I've shared it with the organizers, and they are going to then share it with you. Just to start off very quickly, I want to touch on one. I'll give you an overview of the AfCFTA. What is this? How is it structured? Basically, what we call in political lingo, it's legal architecture. The different components of the agreement. It's very complex and sometimes quite cumbersome. But I'll touch a little bit on that, and then I'll give you an update on progress where we are at. I'll also then share with you some of the realistic export opportunities for your industry. The list is quite extensive. We can do it by tariff headings, product by product, and we are asking your companies to share with us your tariff headings so that we can then give you reports and show you where your realistic market opportunities are across the continent. And for those who also look at other parts of the world, that can also be done. So I'll touch a little bit on that. I'll just use maybe 2 or 3 examples of that. And then I'll talk about how can we build a solid SA Inc. approach to take advantage of these opportunities. Very quickly, our approach and strategy towards the rest of the continent. As you know, African continental integration is a long-standing objective since Ghana became independent. It was pursued intermittently, but really from 2000, when the OAU was transformed into the African Union, it started gaining momentum. And all the different programs of the AU were really aimed towards that. Our South Africa, since 1994, our approach towards the rest of the continent has been anchored on 3 key pillars. Number 1 is trade, with a big focus on us increasing our exports into the rest of the continent. But as we strive to do so, we are also oftentimes confronted by other countries that are asking, you are importing to us, what can we also export to you? And so we are trying to get to a position of balanced trade. So in the work that we do, we not only identify opportunities for South Africa, but where possible, also look for those opportunities for importing of goods from those countries to us. Minister Patel's position regarding that is that we should look at some of the products that we are importing from other parts of the world that can now be supplied by Kenya or by Ethiopia and so forth. The second pillar is around industrialization, because we believe that one of the reasons why we have high transport costs and trade costs is the fact that most of our exports into Africa is by road. And oftentimes the trucks go full, come back empty. So we have to balance that. We have to start creating two-way trade, and it's in our interest to begin to have that approach. So we talk a lot about industrial value chains. So in your sector, to identify what are the industrial value chains that we can create within the SADC region, for example, or with Central Africa or East Africa, and use some of that to begin to remove some of the barriers that many of you are facing. The third pillar is infrastructure development. You want to produce, goods need to move, largely on corridors, and we need to invest in strategic infrastructure. Currently, the big corridor that we use to export a lot of your furniture could be the North-South corridor up to the DRC. It goes there via to Tanzania, and then oftentimes it reaches Kenya and Ethiopia via that route. So debottlenecking that corridor, the road, the rail, and everything else in between, and also the ports that connect to them is extremely important. So the reason why we adopted this strategy is really that we realize that the main issue is not really just tariff barriers. The problem we face is that you have really underdeveloped production structures in many countries. You have high levels of poverty, and many of them want to stimulate economic growth in their countries as well. And so as a way of enabling that, they raise up protective barriers to try and protect their own economies. The second one is integration. How do we capitalize on AfCFTA? We are about 60 million people. The AfCFTA opens up 1.3 billion, a market that big. Countries still have sovereign rights over their borders and determine who comes in, who doesn't, under what conditions. So it's a lot of the negotiation that is currently being undertaken. Now, historically, AfCFTA is very important because our trade with intra-Africa trade is very low, as you know, between 16–18%. Whereas we export a lot to the rest of the world. These are 2013-2019 figures. We exported $495 billion worth of goods. Imported $495 billion worth of goods, but only exported about a substantial portion of this is what the AfCFTA aims to reduce to even half that level of import dependency that we have across the continent. As South Africa, we are a leading nation in terms of intra-Africa exports. We account for about 26 to 31% during the period 2013 to 2019. We are also the leading nation in terms of intra-Africa imports. So in the continent, we are the country who is importing more from other African nations, which augurs well for us, even though sometimes many do not see that actually being the fact. Our exports into the rest of Africa grew from 9 billion rands in 1994 to over 386 billion by 2021. So it's really a big jump. But if you analyze it, you'll see that from 2015, 2016, we sort of plateaued. We remained in the 350 billion, 340 billion, roundabout there. And we start asking the reasons why. But you also see that that's the period where China and many other countries also began to now compete and displace some of our countries. It's also a period where you saw many of our big retailers who went out coming back to South Africa. And those were the ones who were pulling along the South African supply chain. So we need to fix that. Our trade with Africa also helps in promoting jobs, 250,000 jobs created here. This is just a view of our investments in the African continent because, as I said, it's not just about exporting goods. We do believe that whenever a South African company invests outside, they too pull along the South African supply chain in terms of goods and services, and that's encouraged. And you'll see that a lot of our growth in export was actually linked to some of these projects or investments that were made elsewhere. Let me adjust, okay. Now, let's go to the AfCFTA, which is really the reason why. What is the objective of the AfCFTA? Number one is to create a single market for goods in Africa, to remove the barriers that continue to constrain inter-Africa trade. It's part of the Agenda 2063 of the African Union as well. The aim is to liberalize markets. So by doing what? By reducing tariffs. There are two schedules for doing so. There is what they call the least developed countries. They have been allocated 10 years to reduce tariffs. And you have those who are like South Africa, Egypt, to a certain extent, you have 5 years. That's the intent. But in practice, what is happening, because as a nation, when you negotiate under the AfCFTA, you negotiate as part of a regional grouping. So you'll find that Egypt, because it feels it's surrounded by many least developed countries, it will then negotiate as a least developed countries. So what we have realized as South Africa is that all the other countries came in submitted as least developed countries. We were the only ones who submitted differently, but that has now been reviewed. So understand that the tariff reduction schedule is going to be over 10 years. So if it's 20, you then pro rata subdivide it over 10 years from wherever it is to zero within the next 10 years. And the starting date for that is the 1st of January 2021. Whether they only start doing now, it must start from the effective date of 1st of January 2021. The second is really AfCFTA is to lay a foundation for a customs union in the continent. Currently, you have SACO, you have East Africa Community, you have ECOWAS, you have another French-speaking outfit, UNEMOA, in West Africa. There's another one in Central Africa. Unfortunately, SADC is not yet a customs union. So that's the long-term goals. And all these other things I'll not touch on. Let me quickly progress. Now, 54 member states signed, quick update, the agreement. The only one that did not sign the agreement is Eritrea. Of this 54, 45 member states, including those in the 4 customs unions, have submitted their tariff offers on 90% of the coverage of their tariff books. So 90% for this of the tariff book has been covered and submitted and have been certified and verified. So that's how far in terms of tariff negotiations that are ongoing. Currently, the Secretariat has verified 29. On trade in services, so there is trade in goods and there is trade in services, 46 member states have submitted their tariff offers on services, and services covers business services, communication, financial services, tourism, and transport services. All of that fall under that category. Another key element of the AfCFTA is the rules of origin, which determines the level of content that must be included here, like a local content policy for this product to be traded under the rules of the AfCFTA. Now, if the AfCFTA says 60% and your product only accounts for 40%, it will not qualify for the preferential trading under the AfCFTA. So it's very important to be conscious of that and to make sure, and this is where value chains become important, because if you are importing something from other part of the world, that you can now start importing a raw material input or whatever from other African nations and build capacity there and supply from there, it may take you over this threshold of 60. So strategically, it just requires reorientation and rethinking, a paradigm shift on how you can do it. The map there shows the number of countries that have ratified. In our neighborhood, only Botswana is not yet ratified, and Mozambique, so I'm talking about Southern Africa. All the other countries have. West Africa is quite advanced as well, as you can see there in the map. Now, what are the benefits for South African companies? In a nutshell, it will reduce tariff, it will reduce non-tariff barriers, and it will create an opportunity for us to implement what we call trade facilitation programs, which are essentially whereby South Africa will engage with African counterparts to remove the range of barriers that are constraining and limiting your ability to increase exports and trade within the African continent. I'm not going to go through that, but you will see when you receive the presentation that the impact on the level of South African exports into the continent are going to increase quite substantially. What are the key steps that the AfCFTA is following? So the agreement has been signed, ratification is ongoing, rules of origin progress is being made, tariff offers and other are being submitted for both trade in goods and services. The documentation, including certificates of origins, different countries are developing those, so there is a set of documents that you need to prepare. Currently, we are part of what is called the AfCFTA Trade in Goods Initiative, which is piloting 8 countries where they are starting to trade amongst themselves. Kenya is part of it, and other countries as well, just to test the system and see what are the requirements to make it functional and operational. So we are following that very cautiously. The next one is that we need to train our customs officials because rules are changing. So SARS is taking care of that, the new Border Management Authority. We are in the DTIC have identified really realistic trade and export opportunities for South African companies covering almost all the sectors. We have started sharing with some of the companies what those reports are as we receive requests. So do not feel, if you do want to know for your own products, you are more than welcome to engage with us. One other point is that you will need to then register to trade under AfCFTA. So in West Africa, they've got a system so that you then trade under AfCFTA and you then enjoy the preferential procurement and treatment. Now, how do you to position South African companies to capitalize on this opportunity? Now, our first priorities we are focusing is to increase and deepen and expand exports. So in your case is to know which markets are you targeting, what are the products. Our job is to identify the barriers, to work together with you, leverage our government-to-government relations to remove the bottlenecks. It may sound easy, but it's quite sometimes challenging and time-consuming effort. We are then in parallel willing to work with you to facilitate sector, industry, company-specific engagements, very targeted to the countries of your interest, where you feel you have an opportunity to increase your exports. So we're looking forward to work with you. And number 3 is looking at potentially new products that you may want to invest in. We have identified untapped potential in all the countries under the AfCFTA. I'm going to rush very quickly. This is what we have identified in all the regions. So looking at what is our current exports into those markets, what is the most recent exports into that market overall, what is the untapped potential for South African companies, and the number of unique tariff lines. So what you see here, for SADC, for example, there are 564 tariff lines we have identified, and the list goes on. We have, as part of the work, got access to a tool or a platform that can help us identify realistic export opportunities. So this is just for one of the products, tariff heading HS940310 from South Africa. And for these products, the biggest market is Nigeria, followed by Morocco, Angola, and so forth. So we can do it for these products and we can do for many others if you share your tariff heading with us. And the model, this looks at a number of criteria. Economy, market size, import demand. It looks at barriers, tariff and non-tariff, logistics connectivity as well. It looks at market growth as well. And it looks at our ability and capacity to actually supply. So if you look at that specific product, here it shows you what the total realistic export potential is. It shows you the tariff applicable to that product, so you can see the 20% there. It then shows us the share of South Africa in exporting that particular product, and the list continues, and it also shows what is that country importing in total of that specific product, so that you know what our share is, but what the gap and the opportunity still is. What we then also do, we identify via the tool what is your competition, or who is your competition. For this particular product, China share is 74%, followed by United Kingdom. South Africa is at number 7. So if we are talking after, it means there is at least more than 80% that can be substituted by products made in Africa. But that will require us as South Africa to boost our capacity, but negotiate with other countries as well, so that gradually we may not be able to eliminate completely, but we may be able to reduce. And that's part of the work that we need to do with you, to see which markets are ripe for that type of thing. And you can see China dominating by 74%. This is reflected in many other products across many industries, where our share, we are quite dominant in SACU in some products, but in the main across the African continent, foreign countries are quite dominant. So we did this for different products category, just to share with you, and we can do this for your own companies and products step by step. What are the key factors to consider? Is the opportunity realistic that we are pursuing? It's very important that we know that. We now have a tool where we can assess that, and we have a tool where you can go to market to then confirm whether what we are saying on the paper is actually real on the ground as well. I will proceed. Market entry aspects for you to consider. Business ethics and culture, it's very important. Not only language, you have Francophone, Anglophone, it's important to understand that. You know, there is a country I went to some time back, and I arrived there, I just wanted to be business-like, and the guy came to pick me up from the hotel. When he saw me with my bag, he said, "Where are you going? Put your bag back." And he took me to a restaurant, and I sat with him from 2 until 10. And he didn't want to know any business, he just wanted to get to know me, and he told me, "I want to get to know you." There are places where that apply. As South Africans, we oftentimes don't have that culture. We want to come to the business 2 days, we go back, but they want to sit and enjoy it. And we need to be very conscious of that and see how we can fit into that. The second aspect that is important to consider is the formal versus informal. A large majority of African countries are dominated by informal economies. So your normal distribution channels applicable here or in SACU will not be available there. How will you distribute your product in a market that is informal? You don't have distribution systems. You don't have wholesale warehouses. It's small traders around, and you are competing with the guys who actually manufactures in his backyard, and you have to supply. So these things are important, and that's why as DTIC we want to work together with you to see how can we turn the corner in our favor. The last one is ease and cost of access to market. Logistics is a problem. Our connectivity in Southern Africa is much better. By air, we're now a little bit affected because of SAA. Road is much better than rail. Maritime, relatively, Durban plays a big transshipment hub. But when you look at West Africa, we don't have connectivity. Very good. East Africa, the same. And the vessels, when they go from Cape Town or Durban, they go up West Africa, they don't come back same route, they go around the corner via the Swiss Canal, or they go to Europe, they go wherever. So all of these dynamics we need to understand, because it will influence your time to get your goods to market and your competitiveness as well, and the costs that you have to incur. What are the strategies we are proposing? Outward investment-led trade, where South African companies are invested there. Unfortunately, many of our retailers are pulling back. We need to look at what is the alternative to that. There are projects led. We have a database of projects. We see a lot of mixed-use developments taking place, offices, retail outlets, and so forth across the African continent. They need to be furnished. We have a database of about 1.8 trillion projects, trillion worth of projects. We can extract that as that are relevant to your sector. If you tell us, this is the users I target, we can then extract, we can give you the contact, we can assist where you so require for you to be able to take. So this is, for example, the database I'm talking about. You can see construction quite dominant, and construction includes everything that is in your space, office blocks, housing, and everything else. So there's a lot of projects happening around the African continent. Demand for retail space in Africa, how is it going to be growing to 2032? So we have got the date. It allows you to start planning and project who are the big spenders, houses, hospitals. We also have for education. So if you are supplying in those sectors, we can certainly be of assistance to you. Lastly, we have a variety of DTIC incentives. Black industrialists, you already know, but in the export space, we have the Export Marketing Investment Scheme. It helps to undertake trade missions to countries to do sector-specific assistance. So you want to do market research for your product, there is a facility in the DTIC. We also have, if you're implementing a project, you want to do a pre-feasibility or feasibility study, you then have the capital project feasibility program as well that provides some funding for you to be able to undertake that. If you are in the project space, it's important to understand that oftentimes the country that finances the feasibility of the project itself normally will impose a condition that the goods and services are supplied from their country. So we're working with ECIC to put up facilities to assist you in that regard and many others. I will leave the presentation, and I think I've already taken too much time, and it's a graveyard time. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions for John? Yes, Justin? Sure.
Sorry, John, you didn't mention it in your presentation. Just from a clarity perspective, that phase down period between developed and developed countries, that's now gone to 10 years instead of the 15 years initially.
That's 10 years.
So it's moved to 10 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Now remember that the 50 it's 5 years for the most developed. Yeah. South Africa would have fallen under that category, but then 10 years for the others, you know. And whoever joins AfCFTA must later or ratifies later, they will have to catch up to the others. So the time frame is set by the first movers.
That's okay, don't worry about the mic. John, sorry. The Eastern Bloc countries and the European countries are currently doing huge volumes of business into Africa, Central Africa, North Africa, and East and West Africa. How did they get it right that it's taken South Africa so long to actually get to agreements with those countries?
The answer is complex, but let me put it the following way. Firstly, they have had a long-standing relationship with many of the countries. If you look at South Africa from 1994, we really began to make headway. But somewhere along the line, as South Africa began to make its mark in the continent, other countries realized the opportunity. And remember that until quite recently, early 2000, a lot of these countries were considered unstable. Now, where they are getting it right and we are not, is that they have what I'll term package deals. So they bring a solution, but with financing, and sometimes much more cheaper than we can. Most of our exporters still charge ex-works. Most of our exporters. Why? Because of mistrust and many other bad experiences they have had. And whereas the others charge CFI, CIF, and the funding is guaranteed. Now, what we're doing is, that's one of the reasons why the ECIC, which is part of the DTIC family, is putting up different schemes to help mitigate that risk. So that's one of the main reasons. Yes, the second one, the third, is if you look at South Africa, most of our trade is with SACO. We go a little bit up to SADC. Yeah? So our top exporting markets is Zambia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Namibia. That covers about 60% of our exports. You may add a few, 2 or 3 other countries in the Southern African region, then a bit few like Kenya in East Africa. Our trade with West Africa is very, very low, with North Africa very insignificant. Why? Infrastructure connectivity. Why? They don't know much of what our capability is. And that's why leveraging the tools that the DTIC has in terms of the trade and investment mission is very important, but it needs to be very, very targeted. So that when we're taking you to market, we know who you are going to see. We're just not going to market for the sake of it. There are clients we have identified that you'll come, you'll engage. And we are in the process of perfecting that and working much more closely with you. Those are the three answers I can give you. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask you, it's a question I've been asking for a long time, but I can't get a satisfactory answer. I mean, you showed a very important graph there where China contributes 74%, but all the raw material that China is selling to us, it's all from Africa. So I can't understand. We have the skill, we have a cheap cost of labor in this country, in this continent, in terms of our currencies. Why is it that we can't seem to be competitive to China? Now, I know that in China they were giving these export rebates to export, but I believe that that was before they joined WTO. So now you're not allowed to do that. But they still seem to be more competitive. I mean, iron ore in South Africa, 80% goes to China. The ferrochrome, we have the biggest reserves in the world, but we can't transform it into chrome. So I don't understand this.
It's a big problem. Recently, I was at a meeting organized by Transnet, and one of the African banks called Africa Finance Corporation spoke about timber in Gabon, where it was initially all exported raw to China, and then they were re-importing furniture, not just to them, but to other African countries. And what they have done to address that is that they gave the Gabonese financial support to start building up the value chain. And that's why you saw in our second pillar is industrialization. How can we do it? How can we capitalize on the capability that South Africa has to strategically identify sectors and countries where we can invest, help develop value chain linkages with our economy so that we can keep China away? That's one. The second one is financing. China offers what we will call turnkey solution. If you are building a hospital, they'll deliver 70% of everything that goes into that, including the furniture. If they're building houses, they'll do the same. And they then bring for a project the entire value chain, and they have created relationships in the market that encourages importers to rather buy them from them because they are sometimes cheaper but poor quality. So those are the facts that we need to address. But I know I don't want to divulge much. I know that there is some undercurrent going on to set up some kind of a scheme for, you saw the challenge fund, but to support exports, particularly for your industry. And I know that ECIC has approached us to talk about that. So that may help to curtail some of the concerns that you have raised. It's not easy. It's going to be tough negotiations that we'll have to undertake, but the opportunity is there. 74% is too high, unacceptable. We can at least have that. It's something that China will gain and will gain as well.
We're one of those retailers, but we're in Angola. I'm not sure that we are getting the best deal there. I'd like to be able to know who I can speak to in connection with whatever trade agreements we've got for export. Well, we used to export a lot of completed manufactured product from South Africa, but it's not attracting it's not as easy as with SADC. If somebody can, I don't know who we can speak to about possibly trying to get those exports back to Angola.
I'll give you my card after the meeting. We can talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, John.